Welcome, everybody, to the first of a three-part series hosted by the OSCAL Foundation. My name is Ross Nodurft. I work with and support the folks over at the OSCAL Foundation, and I wanted to kick off the discussion today, set a couple of parameters up, and then introduce our main speaker. So for today's discussion, we're going to cover the basics of OSCAL. What is OSCAL? How does it function? What we're starting to get into the first layer of the technical portions of OSCAL, and we are looking forward to interacting with everybody here on this webinar and answering as many questions as we can. The way that we're going to conduct this is Stephen Banghart, who we're very excited to have. He leads the technical aspects of this foundation. He's going to come on and he's going to walk us through his pre-prepared slides. You have a Q&A function in the bottom of your menu bar here. Please feel free to use it throughout the presentation. We're going to record those questions, and at the end of them, Stephen's going to go through and answer the ones he can. We're going to capture all of them. So if you have questions that we don't answer here on this webinar because we run out of time, just know that we're capturing them and we're happy to follow up with you. Stephen will make sure to tell you his name, his email, his contact information. We'd love for folks to be engaged in OSCAL, and we want as many people in the community as possible to continue to engage with us here at the foundation. So with that, I will introduce Stephen Banghart. Stephen has worked at NIST for many years before coming over and being part of this foundation. He's worked specifically on OSCAL as part of NIST. We're excited to have him here helping lead this foundation. So with that, over to you, Stephen.
Thanks, Ross. Really appreciate that. Thank you, everyone, for joining and attending this webinar. Really excited to start this series off with a strong introduction to OSCAL. This is really targeted for people that know very little and maybe even nothing at all about OSCAL. This is intended not only as a live presentation now, but also as a recorded resource in the future that we will make available. So I want to kind of make sure we're all on the same page in terms of what we're going to be covering today, as we are asking for questions to be held towards the end. This way you have kind of an idea of what's coming up, and then we will go and bulk answer all of our questions at the end. So we're going to be covering a little bit of context before we jump into OSCAL itself, a little bit of historical background and a little bit of circumstantial context about how we got to where we are today. Then we'll be diving into the meat of the presentation, which is going to be talking about what is OSCAL itself. We're going to be talking about the use cases and ecosystems in which it's applicable. We're going to be talking about automation, security automation, and the role that OSCAL plays in it. And then we're going to be wrapping up talking about how you or anyone else in your organization, anyone else that's interested, can get involved in the OSCAL effort or the OSCAL Foundation. So Ross already did a wonderful introduction for me. Thank you, Ross. My name is Stephen Banghart, and as Ross mentioned, I am the technical coordinator for the OSCAL Foundation. I lead the technical working group and manage the technical work that is currently being done in the foundation. I was a member of the original team at NIST that put together OSCAL many years ago. They have continued to do great work without me, but I was lucky enough to be part of that original team. And now today I'm joined by the rest of the staffers here at the OSCAL Foundation that manage the day-to-day operations. The OSCAL Foundation, if you're not familiar with it, is a recently founded nonprofit whose sole purpose is to centralize and coordinate the large OSCAL community. We want to bring together all of the stakeholders to facilitate the adoption, education, development, internationalization, and extension of OSCAL. And I'm going to talk about what all of those things mean. First, I think the best way to understand what OSCAL is to take just one half step back and talk a little bit about the circumstances that led to OSCAL's creation and what got us here today. So as many of you, if you are familiar with the compliance world, are aware, is many organizations, not only the US government, but also financial institutions and healthcare providers, have very strict requirements for the software and services that they purchase or acquire. This is an often extensive list of requirements of all different kinds. These requirements run the full gamut of technical to non-technical to human resources to physical security. Managing all of these requirements is important, but expensive, slow, difficult, and resource heavy, both for the person or organization producing the software or service, as well as the organization that is purchasing that software or service. This is a heavyweight process. Over the last several decades, there have been many frameworks created to help organizations express and manage those requirements. There are various standards in ISO that help us do this, express our requirements. In the security compliance world in the United States, we have programs like FISMA, FedRAMP, and there are countless other frameworks, which we're not going to be talking about the details of today. But these were all created to help us solve this problem, or at least mitigate some of the difficulties. But even with these frameworks in place, as excellent as they are, the task remains daunting. As an example, one of the most common security compliance frameworks today is FedRAMP. This is a compliance framework specifically for cloud services being sold to the United States government. FedRAMP provides a template for vendors to use. This template is 526 pages long and 70,000 words. And to be clear, that's the blank template is that long. Once it's filled in, I have seen these documents get to 800, 900 pages or more. So you can imagine how this document, as lengthy and heavy as it is difficult to fill in. It requires a lot of expertise that covers both technical and non-technical fields. It requires a lot of maintenance over time. And this applies to both the vendor producing this document, as well as FedRAMP and the United States government that must consume it. Additionally, you don't have to only do this once. If an organization has compliance requirements, whether that, again, be a healthcare organization that has requirements for its health hardware or health information software, if that's a financial institution managing personal information and financial data, or if that's the US government, they all have a vested interest in not just checking that you're compliant with their requirements once up front, but also throughout the entire duration of the contract, service contract, or whatever terms are in place for the purchase. This is often referred to as continuous assessment. There's other words for it, but this is the term that we're going to use in this presentation. In practice, it is less than continuous. Typically, we see these compliance requirements assessed on some kind of semi-regular frequency, whether that be weeks, months, or somewhere in between or even more. There are issues with these infrequent checks for the organization with requirements. They can't be quite sure that the service that they're purchasing is always compliant with their requirements. And that has very meaningful legal and operational impact. If you're a financial institution, you have very strict legal requirements. And if you are purchasing a cloud service from a vendor and you don't know that they're compliant except for every 6 months when these checks happen, these gaps introduce risk. Several years ago, NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, a US government agency, organization, recognized these issues and started something called OSCAL, which is what we're going to be talking about today. It was these pain points, these challenges, and this difficult situation that really led to a meeting of the minds, not only at NIST, but from other stakeholders, from other government agencies, who all came together to join NIST's OSCAL project and set out to solve, alleviate, mitigate these issues. So, what is OSCAL? It is indeed an acronym. It stands for the Open Security Controls Assessment Language. Now, this is a government acronym. I was there when we first put this together, so I'm partly to blame that, government loves acronyms. What does this actually mean in practice? Open means that OSCAL is developed by an open community of stakeholders. This is not a closed project. This is one that is open to anybody that has any amount of interest in working on it, whether that just be personal interest, vested financial interest, or anything else. The OSCAL project is always based in a community of stakeholders. Security controls. We're going to talk about what a security control is, if you're not familiar, but OSCAL is centered around and focused on communicating about security controls. We do more than just communicate about security controls. We also can drive assessment of those security controls, and that's our A for assessment. And finally, language. OSCAL is a well-defined and standardized machine language. Now, for the next several slides, what I'm going to do is go down each letter of this acronym and provide a more in-depth look at what each of these things really means. And I hope that by the end of it, you will have a holistic picture of what OSCAL and the OSCAL project are, as well as what its vision is for mitigating this compliance communication challenge. First up, let's go into open. As I said, OSCAL is and always has been a community-led project, and this has been the case since its very inception at NIST. Today, now, both NIST and the OSCAL Foundation are organizations dedicated to working on OSCAL, and we both believe that cooperation and collaboration is the key to a successful standard, a successful project, a successful machine language. This is really core to what we believe, and so core it's the first letter of the acronym. Both the vendors that are producing software and needing to provide information about their compliance, as well as organizations that are consuming that information. Both sides of the coin are represented and involved in the work in OSCAL. We want OSCAL to operate as effectively as it can for both parties. That's what we believe is really the key to interoperability and cooperation. And getting involved is free and open to anybody. Again, this has been true since NIST started the project years ago, and it's true today. We will cover at the end of this presentation how, if this interests you, you can get involved at no cost to you or your organization. So security controls, our middle two letters, the S and the C. This requires a little bit more coverage. What are a security control? Depending on your background, it's very likely you're already very familiar with this. But as an introductory presentation, we want to really make sure that everyone's on the same page moving forward. So the definition of a security control is not always particularly clear, and there's a lot of wiggle room depending on the interpretation and the particular environment and the particular compliance that you're talking about. In general, a security control is a single implementable or actionable item that contributes towards an enterprise's overall security. And I think the best way to illustrate that's by an example. This is a very simple, kind of trivial, made-up example. Perhaps a government agency has the following security control as a requirement. They say, all computers in the enterprise are set to log off automatically after 15 minutes of inactivity, right? So that is a single implementable item. You either have configured all of your machines to do that, or you have not. This is something that you can go and do and say, yes, I have set all of my machines to automatically log out after 15 minutes. In that case, you are compliant with that single security control. If you haven't done this, you are not compliant with that control. There is a spectrum, of course, that sometimes things are halfway compliant, and that's a complexity we're not going to be talking about today, but is worth keeping in mind. It's worth noting that in practice, when we talk about being compliant or not compliant with these security controls, vendors also need to provide evidence that they're compliant with a given control. If this example government agency has that as their requirement, when they're procuring a service, they're going to ask for proof. Just saying, yes, I am compliant with this control is in most cases not sufficient. Security controls are truly flexible in the sense that they can cover almost anything. We have security controls that are about very, very specific technical elements, such as what encryption methods you are using, or even how many bits of encryption strength are inside of a particular algorithm for particular uses. But it also covers non-technical elements and things that are very broad, such as employee training programs, physical security. Do you have cards to swipe through doors? How do those doors lock when you close behind them? After how long? So you can imagine that pretty much anything that can contribute towards an enterprise's security is something that is capturable as a security control. And as I mentioned, the vendor really provides two things when they answer a control for this compliance process. They say, yes, I am compliant with it. Here is how I'm compliant with it. And here's a piece of evidence that verifies I am compliant with it. In the typical approach, the original painful approach, the vendor in question would take those things for each control. The yes, I'm compliant. Here's how I'm compliant. Here's the proof of that compliance. And put that into a document. And then put in 300 more of those for all of the other 300 individual controls that they're responsible for any given acquisition. That's how we end up with our 900-page Word document that we talked about earlier. It's really just a very long list of these individual security controls and how they are being met. OSCAL, as I mentioned at the top of this section, is based around security controls. It's a way of communicating about security controls. And OSCAL is designed to tackle this from the beginning to the bottom of the security control pipeline. That means that OSCAL gives you a way to communicate about the requirement itself instead of this prose requirement of all computers in the enterprise are set to log off automatically after 15 minutes of an activity. Obviously, a human understands that. OSCAL provides a way of representing that requirement in a more standardized and machine-readable way. It also provides a way of communicating from the other side and saying, here is how I'm compliant with this. Here's the proof that I'm compliant with this. And being able to put that in a standardized, structured way. The fourth letter of our acronym is assessment. Assessment is a broad topic that we're going to do a light touch on today for this webinar because it does cover a lot of individual topics. Today, in this process that I've described, where we have a 900-page Word document specifying compliance for each control, the organization that is making this purchase must verify these things. They must look at the evidence and make sure that the evidence is legitimate and it does in fact prove what is being stated. They often have to go and check that the evidence is legitimate as well and not falsified or problematic or anything like that. This is a tremendously difficult process. As you can imagine, if putting together that 900-page document is difficult, it being your job to sit down and individually review and verify every single one of those controls is even harder. And on top of that, they don't only have to do it once. They have to do it every 6 months, every year, over and over again in order to comply with continuous assessment. OSCAL provides the mechanisms through which this continuous assessment process can be streamlined and eventually fully automated. Since we're talking about security controls, and this assessment process is really just checking each security control, OSCAL provides mechanisms to automate that such that the security controls can be checked by machines automatically, piecemeal, over the internet, and at any time, eliminating a lot of the issues that we have today with continuous assessment. This vision of an automated assessment world is one where both organizations on the procuring side, as well as on the service provider or software provider side, need to spend far fewer resources in order to remain compliant and prove compliance when we're talking about continuous assessment. So we've covered our first 4 letters. OSCAL is open. OSCAL talks about and is based on security controls. OSCAL enables assessment use cases. Our last letter is L for language. What does that mean? When we say language, we mean it's a machine-readable language. It's something made specifically for machines to be able to handle the ingestion of, the processing of, the output of, so that machines can talk to each other in a rapid, automated way about security controls. Now, it's a machine-readable language. That means that sometimes it can be a little bit scary to look at as a human. However, I want to talk about an example here of how code that looks scary because it's machine readable is handled by our tools. The example I have here, this is the actual source code for the Google homepage, and the exact same homepage but screenshotted in a web browser. We can see a machine readable language, which is used to communicate between machines, is turned into or rendered into something that humans can recognize. And this is an important part of how all computers work. OSCAL is no different. OSCAL is a machine-readable language designed for machines to talk to other machines. But that doesn't mean that humans can't be part of that pipeline where it's appropriate. And in order to do that, tools take OSCAL and turn it into something that's more palatable for us to look at. So what is OSCAL really? And the next 2 slides are going to be the most technical slides of this presentation. They're going to be very, very just a gentle dip into some of the technical elements here. We're not going to go any deeper than this on this webinar, as this is just an introductory session. But this will just give a very, very brief overview here. We're talking about individual OSCAL documents. An OSCAL document is a single file that can be shared between computers automatically. And each OSCAL document represents some real-world part of that compliance process, but turned into that machine-readable, shareable, and automatable format. Once we have several of these OSCAL documents together, as a whole, they represent all of the information that would have been used in that traditional process. So anything that's included in that compliance workflow we talked about before, whether that's the expression of the requirements, the listing of evidence, or the statements describing how you're compliant with individual controls, every element is wrapped up into an OSCAL document, and together it represents the whole picture. I'm going to show you what an OSCAL document looks like. And depending on your level of technical expertise, it might look scary, but I promise that it's not, and it's actually quite straightforward, and we're not going to go into detail. So all of this text on your screen here is what an OSCAL document actually looks like. If you want to know what OSCAL actually is, this is what OSCAL actually is. This is a machine-readable language, which is why it doesn't look quite like human language. But at the same time, if you look down the page, you see a lot of English text. And that makes sense because OSCAL is representing all of the information that would have been part of that compliance process. And there's just a lot of written language that makes up that process. So unsurprisingly, OSCAL documents are a standard format, a machine readable format, way of expressing both of this human readable language and some more technical items that are not human readable. There are 7 types of OSCAL document, each one specialized for a specific purpose, but we're not going to be covering those 7 types of OSCAL document today. If you want to learn more about OSCAL documents, these 7 types of documents and the specific purposes that they're built to be able to deal with, then we would love to have you on our next webinar, which is going to be covering OSCAL at that document technical level. If you want to learn more about the documents formatting and specific technical implementation at an extremely technical level, maybe you're an engineer, or you're listening to this conversation and you want to have your engineers learn more about OSCAL, then the 3rd webinar in this series would be the perfect thing to attend, where we'll be talking about the specific programming and implementation parts of this OSCAL document. But for this session, that's the extent to which we're going to be covering technical debt. So what we've talked about so far is the original use case that gave rise to OSCAL originally. The problem was needing to deal with security compliance requirements in software and service procurement. However, as the years have gone on, it's become readily apparent that there are other non-security, non-US government use cases that OSCAL can help provide mitigation of those challenges for. We've mentioned some of these in passing, but finance has significant requirements outside of just security, computer security. There are other regulations and standards globally and domestically that they have to follow. OSCAL is not limited to only security. Despite the fact that we have security in the name, it turns out that controls, in a more general sense, cover more than just security. And OSCAL is just as capable of communicating about those as they are anything else. So other regulations, financial regulations, in the healthcare industry, there's significant PII management requirements on top of just raw security. There's also significant privacy requirements in not just finance and healthcare, but in pretty much every other ecosystem and industry. There are countless regulations, requirements, compliance frameworks, really we could list them all day, that we believe OSCAL is capable of streamlining and making more efficient as we move towards a more automated future. So to wrap up the preset part of this webinar, OSCAL is an open effort where we want everyone to participate. If you have any interest or stake in it at all, we want you at the table. We want you speaking your mind, letting us know what your challenges are, and feeding in your own input in terms of how OSCAL can meet your needs. OSCAL is a machine-readable language that enables automation, not only of continuous assessments, but of the entire compliance process. OSCAL is a streamlined way of communicating about control requirements and control implementations. It doesn't have to just be a machine-to-machine automation language. It also provides us a way of expressing requirements and expressing how we meet those requirements in a more compact, streamlined, and easily more easily maintained format that we can then render nicely using software. And OSCAL is more than just a language. It's an ecosystem, and it's an up-and-coming ecosystem of vendors and purchasers, of users, of tool developers, all working together in this wider ecosystem towards this overall goal of streamlining compliance. So that is our 30-minute prepared educational session. This is recorded and will be made available, as are the slides. For the remainder of the webinar, I would really like to have an interactive conversation with our audience, allow you to please ask any question. And this is an introductory session, so please do not hesitate to ask any question, no matter how basic. I will provide an answer to the best of my ability. Anything about the OSCAL language, the OSCAL project, its history, where we're at today, or anything in that ballpark. So I have some questions here already I'm going to start digging into. Please continue to submit questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and I will get to them as we go in order. Okay, so our first question is regarding getting involved in OSCAL Foundation. Thank you. That's a really great question, asking what GitHub links do we use to start with OSCAL implementation for FedRAMP in particular. So I'm going to break the question up into a couple pieces. There is a GitHub repository, which is a place for storing code mostly, that NIST owns and operates, that stores the current authoritative information on the OSCAL standards. So if you are looking for where those standards formally live, that will be at the NIST OSCAL repository. And I can get a link for you for that in a moment. There's a couple other places. There is also an OSCAL Foundation GitHub repository, which is a mirror of the NIST repository and is where we do a lot of our foundation technical work. So those are the current GitHub repositories out there. Now, I wanted to address the part of it you're asking, how do we start with OSCAL implementation for FedRAMP? And that's a little bit more of a difficult question. There's not necessarily a single GitHub repository where you can go and just get started with an OSCAL implementation for FedRAMP. It's a little bit more of a complicated answer. The NIST OSCAL website houses some excellent resources to help get you started. Additionally, the OSCAL Foundation is fairly new. We've just founded ourselves in the last several months. We are working on diligently producing both a GitHub repository and a section of our website that will contain helpful information on getting started with OSCAL, not only for FedRAMP, but for other use cases as well. Okay. Rakesh asks, how confident are you in the adoption of OSCAL? The latest I heard from Pete was that he wants industry to drive it. What are your thoughts? Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you that have been following OSCAL and FedRAMP, there have been recent announcements about changes at the FedRAMP project, at the PMO. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that here today because I do want to focus questions about OSCAL itself. However, I'm very confident in it because the industry is here behind OSCAL now. And FedRAMP has indicated that they want industry to lead the effort. The OSCAL Foundation represents that industry. And we're here, we're involved, we're energized, and we're really ready to make the push for OSCAL to be the future of security compliance automation, both at FedRAMP and elsewhere. What other security/risk management frameworks are supported by OSCAL outside of NIST, if any? It's a question from Aubrey Merchant. Thank you, Aubrey. So today, there are the various NIST control catalogs supported by OSCAL. Additionally, the Australian ISM, the Information Security Manual, is Australia's equivalent of FedRAMP or FISMA. And that is maintained and released in OSCAL format. So the Australian government has been extremely supportive of the OSCAL effort. There's also a couple projects in flight that governments around the world are working on producing their security compliance catalogs in OSCAL. I can't give firm details about most of them. I do know that the Singaporean government's particularly interested, and we are, in our capacity at the foundation, also working with the EU on getting some of their newer security compliance frameworks and regulatory frameworks produced in an OSCAL format. Okay, from Andrew Braunberg. Do you anticipate additional security use cases beyond compliance that build on continuous controls monitoring? Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a very nascent area. There has not been a like firm, somebody has not filled this gap yet, but it is one that we've been talking about for many years. There is absolutely a use case for OSCAL outside of compliance. One could imagine a security company, a company whose purpose is to help other companies with their security, produce controls that are not requirement controls, but rather recommendations, part of that security company's total package of security elements that they monitor for you. And they can provide that in OSCAL, and they can use OSCAL's assessment capabilities to do automatic measuring and automatic assessment of those individual controls, and use that as a interoperable and standardized assessment of any arbitrary control, even if that control is a complete invention of that security company. So they don't need to be tied to compliance. So I do anticipate that there will be some vendors that step into that space as time goes on. I think it's a great use case. Michael Magrath asks, understanding the foundation is new, are vendors serving financial service companies, the financial institutions, or regulators part of the foundation? Is there outreach activities to recruit them? Same question with healthcare. Yeah, absolutely. One of the core missions of the OSCAL Foundation is to be doing that kind of outreach, not only within the security compliance, it's kind of strict bubble that we were talking about, but beyond that in finance and healthcare. I don't believe I can fully disclose the list of members that we have in process right now, but we are actively having conversations with particularly the finance sector has demonstrated interest in getting involved in this. We are having conversations with healthcare as well. I think they just move a little bit slower on average. I do expect that they'll be on board eventually. Yeah, Michaela Iorga, who is the lead of the OSCAL program at NIST, and who has done every single day amazing work on OSCAL, has provided some additional answers regarding what is already supporting OSCAL. So I'll go ahead and read those. This is with regards to the question that was asked about what other security risk management frameworks are supported by OSCAL. Michaela notes the CSA, CCM, several standards in the EU. NIST is also very soon going to post 800-171, as well as the CSF v2 in the OSCAL format. And CIS as well. The CIS 25 critical controls are additionally currently provided in the OSCAL format. Okay. Next question from Rakesh. What does the appetite look like for the GRC tools that can help give government confidence in the tools they procure? The appetite for GRC tools in the government that manages this is high, and that's because this process is so expensive and so time consuming that really any solution to that is offered to the federal government is a very enticing one. So I am familiar with, particularly for the vendors themselves. So a little bit less so for the government agencies themselves, more so for the vendors that are producing the software and need to provide compliance information. There is a huge appetite for GRC tools because the process is almost unmanageable without them. What I typically see is small companies will begin the process of getting involved in compliance. They want to sell to the US government, so they start doing compliance. They manage everything by hand. So that's a Word document, an Excel spreadsheet, whatever it may be. They do everything by hand for maybe the first 18 months. They're successful. They get picked up by the government agency in question. As they begin to expand, maybe they expand into other markets that require other regulatory frameworks. Maybe they are beholden to multiple regulations at the same time, and they need to prove their compliance not only to those security controls, but also to perhaps EU privacy requirements. And it's at that point that GRC tools, many of which who support OSCAL, are able to really come in and help those vendors organize, manage, iterate on, and eventually package and export out that compliance information to government agencies. So GRC tools are an extremely important part of this ecosystem. They're heavily involved in the OSCAL Foundation itself and have been involved in OSCAL since its inception. Michaela Iorga, again, the NIST lead for OSCAL, notes that IBM has recently demonstrated OSCAL alongside AI with their CISO agent is a tool. So it's that. Can we get a recording of this video? Yes, absolutely. A recording of this webinar, not only the first 30-minute preset section, but also this Q&A section. Those will both be made available once they're ready on the OSCAL Foundation website. So it's oscalfoundation.org. It will take a little bit of time. The foundation is new and we're still getting some of our technical infrastructure solidified. But as soon as possible, that recording will be made available there, and we'll make sure that everyone gets a notice of that as well. Okay, we have a question here from VJ. It's a little bit of a longer one, so I'm going to go ahead and read it out loud. This is my first time reading it as well. If you are aware of the SSDF federal regulation, yes. There was an executive order updating guidelines which mentioned the Secretary of Homeland Security, acting through the Director of CISA, shall evaluate emerging methods of generating, receiving, and verifying machine-readable, secure software development attestations and artifacts, and as appropriate, shall provide guidance for software providers on submitting them to CISA's RSAA website, including a common data format and data schema. Are they referring to OSCAL? Is the question. So they're asking about CISA's recent requirements regarding software attestation. They are not specifically referring to OSCAL in that context. While OSCAL is in a very closely related, tangentially related ecosystem of security control compliance, the SSDF and software artifact attestation is a little bit of a different use case. OSCAL is really about communicating about security controls and less about communicating about software as a whole. So there's absolutely a ton of interaction and potential value adds that the OSCAL ecosystem can provide to that software attestation ecosystem. They should work together at the edges. They should provide information to one another and be able to reference one another back and forth. But I do believe that it will take a different machine readable language for that specific software attestation use case. This is from Naveen Sanku. Thank you. Any other automation capabilities OSCAL presents other than documentation for assessments? Yes, OSCAL supports the full automation pipeline from top to bottom. So if every individual member of the process is using and supporting OSCAL, then from the top of defining which controls somebody must be compliant with to requesting that documentation about how the vendor is compliant with those things, down to the actual assessment process itself is supported by OSCAL. So it is absolutely possible for a organization to automatically, using OSCAL, go and ping their vendors to get the information that they need for continuous assessment. And you can do that all automatically without human intervention. That doesn't mean it's necessarily easy to do that. There's a lot of work that goes into automating anything, but OSCAL is a way of making that happen. It is a tool that can be used to automate that process and supports it at each step along the way. This is a question from Rakesh Patel. Is there any thought about directly integrating platforms to auto submit their ATO? I think this is a question more for FedRAMP than it is for us. Here at the OSCAL Foundation, we're interested in making OSCAL as good as it can be for any number of use cases. FedRAMP is one of the use cases that we want OSCAL to be really good for, but it's not the only one. So FedRAMP has, and maybe you meant this outside of a FedRAMP context. That's possible as well. OSCAL as a language needs to support that process of automatic submission, automatic assessment. And the foundation works towards making OSCAL as good as it can possibly be at supporting that process. So the very basic answer to your question is yes, there has been thought about directly integrating platforms. However, that is really something that we can only provide guidance and information on as the foundation, and not something that we're in direct control of. Aaron Bowers asks, does OSCAL have the capability to support vulnerability management and continuous monitoring reporting? OSCAL can do a lot of things, but is purposefully not a all-in-one, boil the ocean, cover everything. So OSCAL supports the ability to trigger vulnerability management as part of the compliance project. It is not designed to handle the vulnerability management itself. So as part of this automatic continuous monitoring using the OSCAL ecosystem, there are little hook points where it can trigger other processes, other pieces of software. And it's there that you would connect existing vulnerability management solutions into that OSCAL process so that it can trigger it and then collect the information that it provides and package that output as part of the overall OSCAL output. So it supports vulnerability management. It is a driver for continuous monitoring reporting. It doesn't necessarily do all of those things itself, and I think that's a good thing. I think specialization is important. That's the end of our question queue. I'm gonna scroll back up and make sure I didn't miss anything. If you have a question, we're coming up on your last chance to slip it in. So please ask any questions that are on your mind while I double check to make sure that I have caught all of our questions. Okay, great. The last thing I want to cover before this webinar ends is just some brief information about the OSCAL Foundation itself. As we mentioned, this is a completely open organization. We run a number of working groups on various meeting cadences. Right now, you could join and participate in our technical working group. And this is a highly technical group that is working on OSCAL itself. If your organization is already implementing OSCAL, this is the group that you should be in. This is the group where we are actively discussing updates and improvements to OSCAL. And if you have a stake in that because you are actively implementing OSCAL, I highly recommend that you get plugged in and get involved with the technical working group. If you are involved in OSCAL but in a non-technical capacity, highly recommend you get involved in our engagement working group. This is a non-technical working group focused on educating people about OSCAL, getting the word out there about it, speaking engagements, as well as more events like this webinar. Highly recommend you get involved in the engagement working group if you have any organizational stake in OSCAL. Checking. Okay, we don't have any other questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Ross. Maybe you could say a few concluding words to wrap us up. We're all out of questions and are good to go.
Thank you very much, Stephen. That was very helpful. Again, this is the start of a three-part series. We are here, and like Stephen said, we welcome your engagement. We will put, Stephen will drop his email into the chat right now. So if you can reach out to him directly for the foundation or to the Q&A bank, whatever it is. And then we will send an email out to the folks who've registered with the link to this webinar. We'll post it on our website, and we'll provide contact information for you guys to get engaged. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone. And that information about the contact will come to you via probably email. We don't have direct access to chat at the moment, but that information will be made readily available for you. Oh, perfect. Caitlin's going to provide that. Yeah. Thanks. Okay, our Caitlin is going to provide that email in the chat for us in just a second, and that is my OSCAL Foundation email. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions, any comments, if you want to get involved, or if you just want to talk about OSCAL. I am more than happy to do so. I love OSCAL, was involved for a very long time in it, and would talk anyone's ear off about it, or sit and listen about your interactions with OSCAL. So please do not hesitate to reach out. And with that, that is the end of our first webinar. Thank you so much to everyone who attended, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.